This is Ashley Newby, and you're listening to the Black Studies Podcast, a Mellon Grant-sponsored series of conversations examining the history of the field. Our conversations engage with a wide range of activists and scholars, senior figures in the field, late doctoral students, cultural workers, political organizers, and everyone in between in order to explore the cultural and political meaning of Black studies as an area of inquiry and its critical methods. All right. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Black Studies Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Austin Jackson, Assistant Professor of Practice in English and Nonfiction and affiliated faculty with the Department of Africana Studies, Rights and Reason Theater at Brown University. Dr. Jackson is also the entire reason why I went into Black Studies. So I'm very excited to be able to interview him today and talk to him a little bit about his experiences in the field and his commitment to the field itself. So, hi, Austin.
Hi, Ashley. I'm so happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem at all. So, I know that, so I took your first year writing course, my first year at Michigan State University, and that was one of the most influential courses I have ever taken still to date. You really introduced Black studies in that context. At the time, I know you were getting your PhD in Black studies. So what drew you to the field?
Yeah, that's, well, first of all, let me just say that I'm extremely proud of you. Congratulations on your Mellon grant. This is a wonderful project. And I am just so eminently proud of the work that you do. It's just absolutely amazing. Both you and your
Thank you.
Phenomenal sister. I hope I can mention her name as well. Give her a shout out. You know, Jessica Newby, who's a PhD student of history at Johns Hopkins University. But what brought me into the field? I guess I don't want to sound too lofty, but I guess I have to kind of talk a little bit more about my background outside of college, because I don't have any stake in defining Black studies as a discipline or a field that to me, it transcends the limited confines of academia for me personally. But yeah, so I was born in 1972 in the backdrop of the Black Power and Civil Rights movements. I grew up with parents who weren't really like traditional activists, but were kind of adjacent to like the Black Panthers, various Black nationalist movements where I grew up in New York, always throwing like rent parties, trying to find ways to help other Black people in the community. And even though like my mother, my stepfather never really, sat me down and said, well, this is what Black literature is. This is what Black studies is. There was always like Black literature, Soul on Ice, Malcolm X, it was just sort of like this ambient awareness about the importance and centrality about not just Black people in general, but especially about our music, our language, and our culture. My stepfather was is a jazz musician. So I grew up, soul, funk, jazz. And then, of course, since I was born in 72, I identified really strongly with the emerging hip hop movement, that emerged in the late 70s. So all of this kind of like helped shape my Black consciousness from a very early age. So it's kind of, so Black studies for me began as more of a mood, a kind of ambient awareness of the importance of understanding our history and being proud of it, both before and after slavery. In my formative years, growing up in the 1980s during what I guess I'll call the crisis years of the Reagan era, the economic recession, the crack cocaine epidemic, that turned my little city in upstate New York, small city called Utica, New York, it kind of turned it into like a war zone. And then you combine that with the government's inadequate response to the AIDS epidemic at the time, like things were just really bad. And, I felt like as a kid, around 14 or 15 years old, that I kept hearing about the how things have changed, so much for Black people, but I really didn't see it. I experienced something completely different, in American society during that time period, with my own body, the violence, the crack cocaine epidemic claimed both of my parents, so I grew up in crack houses from about 1985 until I graduated high school in 1990. So for me, the study of Black people isn't theoretical. And that's the reason why I said that. For me, it doesn't start with, these pitched battles over, defining Black studies. Is it this or is that? And is it Afrocentric? Is it, I don't have any stake in that fight whatsoever. But for me, one of the major impact, as you know, because I talked about this in class and also in my dissertation, that one of the responses to those conditions that I just mentioned was the emergence of this sort of neo-Black nationalist movement within hip hop culture, and that served as my intervention. So instead of like dealing drugs and doing things that were, basically killing young Black boys at that time, I immersed myself in that Black consciousness that emerged in hip hop. Whether it be Eric B. and Rakim. Believe it or not, you can laugh at this, Ashley, but I used to be a dancer inside of a hip hop group. Okay. I
didn't know that.
Yes, absolutely. So, but yeah, that was my, like for many of us, it's hip hop literally like saved our lives, but I wasn't really that much into school, really. I mean, I got decent grades and I got accepted to some colleges in upstate New York, like Syracuse and, and Cornell, but I didn't have much self-confidence because it was hard to study and really immerse myself in academics when, you're living in a crack house, and I was raising like my 3 siblings, because my parents simply weren't there, and just dealing with homelessness and, just instability. So I joined the military to get out. And during that time period, I had a chance to reflect on what it is I really want to do. And I thought about the fact that I used my writing during high school. Like I was like a high school journalist for the school newspaper, writing about racial issues at the time. One of my articles was about Yusuf Hawkins, who was killed by a racist mob, in New York City, and talking about the racial situation in my city that was mostly Italian at the time, and racial strife, caused by tension between Italians and Blacks, and it gave me an outlet for not just talking or speaking, but the act of writing gave me a chance to reflect and really think deeply about, my situation in my community. So when I was in the military, I just got this idea of maybe I should be a high school English teacher. Maybe I can take some of the stuff I learned from like rap and hip hop and things that served as interventions for me, and I could make a difference in the lives of kids like me that grew up like me. But then in 1996, when I was an undergraduate, I went to Norfolk State University, HBCU in Norfolk, Virginia. The so-called Ebonics controversy broke out, around like the late 1996, 1997. And I just happened to be visiting someone in California at the time. I was in Orange County, and I didn't know anything about Black English. So I'm like, what is this? And just in a weird, like, kind of coincidence, the very next semester, I was enrolled in a class with this phenomenal teacher named Ronnie Hopkins. He was a former student of Geneva Smitherman, our mutual professor at Michigan State University. And he was teaching a class called Black English and Linguistic Universals. And I was taking that class as the so-called Ebonics. I say so-called controversy because there's nothing controversial about the Ebonics thing. It just made sense. It's a lot of people who had a lot of misunderstandings and intentional ignorance and racism that made it a controversy. But that essentially was like a game changer for me. Like, whoa, you're telling me that all this time that Black people have their own language, a mixture of like West African, Niger Congo dialects mixed in with English. And that's the reason why Black people sound differently, that the way that Black people talk is not quote unquote broken grammar, but that we have a language that's connected to a history before slavery. That blew my mind. So by taking that class, I was immersed in literature about how, we needed to teach teachers about this stuff. I learned about the famous Ann Arbor case, Black English Ann Arbor case that Dr. Smitherman was involved in. And reading her talking and testifying as an undergraduate, reading a text written in Black language I just can't put into words like what that did to me. It's like, yeah, it just totally blew my mind. And I said, I have to be involved in this fight in some way. So I got the idea that, I wanted to study with Dr. Smitherman. And make a long story short, beginning in my sophomore years, I participated in a program very much like McNair Schropp, which I also taught in, if my memory serves. I taught in McNair Schropp. You were one of my students in the humanities research section, right? Man, we've been hanging tough for a while, Ashley.
It's been a while.
Man, that is so beautiful. But yeah, I spent my summers doing research with Dr. Smitherman and Dr. Denise Troutman, another linguist at Michigan State. And I ended up doing my an award-winning thesis when I was an undergraduate on this subject. But as you know, because this kind of coincides with the time in which I was working in James Madison College at Michigan State, and I encountered you and all those just phenomenal students in James Madison, like Kyle Mays, who's now a professor at UCLA, and your girl Christian Grant, and oh my God. Anyway, this is a podcast. Let me stop name people. But I realized that, but also when I was a graduate student, I guess as a kind of side hustle, I'd accept invitations by in-service teachers to come and do workshops on this subject, mostly white people, but, some Black folks. And one thing that I realized, though, is that I was wrong, that teaching white people to understand Black language wasn't going to do a damn thing if they're still racist. And I noticed that all these, it was nice making a little bit of extra money, as a consultant doing that work. But I always got the same kind of feedback, no matter how much literature I provided to them, no matter no matter the teaching strategies I shared, I got the same pushback. No matter what, these teachers would always say, in the end of the day, they need to know how to speak right and write right so they can pass the test. And I'm like, yeah, we know that, but you also have to understand that these kids are bringing in all these different linguistic gifts that you can draw on, as assets instead of deficits. And it just wasn't getting through. So it made me think about that Ebonics controversy. Well, actually, maybe this is not an issue of language. This is an issue of power. This is an issue of privilege. And you got to crack, that barrier before we can even open up the possibilities of teachers learning something about their students, So, but there's also something else that kind of coincided with my grad school experience that led me into Black Studies was, we at first, the 9/11 and this sort of authoritarianism that popped up, which I'll openly call fascism, curtailment of civil rights and, racist war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I saw the ways that the university, kind of cracked down on students who were protesting these kinds of things. So that made me think about, well, I need to actually give students the tools to defend themselves, to arm them with the knowledge and rhetorical tools, to make the case, to agitate, to struggle. In other words, do the things that you're supposed to do in American university, protest, take to the streets, demand change, that kind of thing. So accidentally, I became kind of like a student activist, and I drew that in my class. And then that's what you got when you entered my classroom. So
8 a.m. and activism,
absolutely.
8 a.m.
Yep. Activism at 8 a.m. And, and I admired y'all for that, because you didn't have to take my class at 8 o'clock in the morning, part of me feels like they wanted me to teach at 8 o'clock in the morning because they didn't want y'all in there in the first place. But yeah, Kyle Mays, who never registered for the class, but his crazy butt in the class at 7 a.m., waiting, participating the entire time. And it was just beautiful. Being able to teach, about the relationship between public policy, language, and racism, and how those three coordinates inform each other, and having that kind of radical perspective, not radical in the sense that, understanding critical race theory was going to, cause people to go and, try to start a revolution. but radical in the sense that we were getting down to the root causes of the problems and getting beyond the limitations of, liberal surface level rhetoric about racism as feelings and misconception, things of that nature. If you remember, we also use Marxist literary theory as well. So talking about hegemony and, counter-hegemony, class consciousness, all that stuff, and Black womenism, Black feminism. And the unique thing about your class, and this happened in your particular class, that's why I think that this interview is really interesting, that it was in your class that challenged me as a professor, even though I was a PhD student, it was your class that overtly said that, you know what, Austin, we're talking about these things, but what are we going to do outside the classroom, to make to engage these issues in meaningful ways? And I was like, well, damn. All right, let's go. So out of your class, that's what started the foundation for what eventually became Young Democratic Socialists. That became the real organization that you and Kristen created, for Black women and other activist movements. And that was the focus of my dissertation. I didn't plan on doing that shit, I just thought I was going to do like a little social linguistic, pedagogical project. And but it was delightful to see that, using these different approaches, which I consider within the disciplinary sphere of Black studies, seeing the ways that you and, your fellow students in James Madison took those ideas and created new structures outside the classroom, new student organizations, creating activist movements to change the curriculum of James Madison, which was successful, to include like things like Malcolm X. I mean, that was absolutely beautiful. And that's what still animates what I do today, even though like my current job is very much different than what I was doing at Michigan State.
James Madison was a very interesting space. And I think that I appreciate my time there, right? I met you, I met some of my very best friends to this day. But I do think that like the juxtaposition between like your class and every other class we were taking, with the exception of like Dr. Stokes' class, was so stark that it was like there has to be something else, because that was rough. There were definitely, that was a very particular space at that time. I'll just say that.
What was rough about it, if you don't mind me asking? I know you're doing the interview, but I'm just curious.
There were so many microaggressions, and there was so much just flippant. Like, we're reading the Federalist Papers, and we're reading the Constitution, and we're reading all of these, and Prince's Machiavelli, and we're reading all of these things that like are supposed to be these really important, influential works. But most of the classes are not critiquing them in the ways that they should. And they're not pushing back against the hypocrisy of not just the mythology around our founding fathers, but the hypocrisy that was embedded in their formation of this country.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And the idea that, this was a different time was something that was very common, right? Well, it was a different time. So yes, we understand that they were wrong, but like in that time, this was how people operated, or in that time, this was how people thought, and this was considered to be appropriate. Okay. And we know that that is wrong. So why are we still talking about it in 2005? Like they talked about it in 1850. Like, excuse me? So and there were definitely, because of the type of students who tended to go to James Madison, Michigan State University is a PWI. James Madison is probably, whiter than some of the other spaces on campus.
Definitely.
And then we're living there. Like, it's a living learning situation. So it's not just taking classes with people who don't necessarily recognize your humanity. It's having to live with them as well. And there were just some very tense and difficult situations in between those two conjunctions.
Absolutely. Yeah. I don't know if it's appropriate to get into it on the podcast, but remember that activism also translated into like direct action and confrontation, to the point where some of our students, myself included, even though I was a graduate student, actually put ourselves on the line. But I won't ramble on about that. We can do a whole other podcast about that. Definitely James Madison had a certain investment in a master narrative about the state, the purpose of the state, not just the United States, but in general. When I started understanding what students were doing beyond James Madison, many of them were going into the State Department, USAID. Many of them, and we had like cookies with the CIA that was there recruiting and stuff like that, whatever. So I certainly understand, why, and also going to law school and stuff like that. But I guess to James Madison's credit, despite, its limitations and its racism, and I say that openly, publicly, that it was, in fact, overtly racist in many ways, I still give it credit for being a home for Dr. Curtis Stokes, who actually, kind of getting to like another question that you asked a few minutes ago, like how I entered Black Studies, like the actual academic discipline of Black Studies. I have to give credit to Dr. Stokes and Geneva Smitherman. Again, just, these really interesting kismet moments of coincidence or fate or whatever, that I was in English. I was actually happy in English. I was in a PhD program in it no longer goes by this name, but the Critical Studies and Teaching of English. And it was the closest thing that I could study that was overtly radical, like a Marxist approach to language studies and pedagogy. So Paulo Freire and, all that stuff, transformative education. So I actually loved it. I was having a really great time in that PhD program. My second year of the PhD program in English, I became a research assistant for Curtis Stokes as he and, our inner circle of elders at Michigan State was forming what became African Studies program and now a department at Michigan State. And that's when I started to learn about not just Black studies as Black content, Black ideas, but as an academic discipline, because I had to do a lot of the, research about other PhD programs that existed at the time. There weren't too many. And long story short, I was like, wow, okay, here's a discipline that was founded by student demand, protesting for radical change. And that excited the hell out of me. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that, And, even though other disciplines like Chicano studies, for example, Michigan State has a wonderful Chicano studies program. My boy, Todd Morales, another like radical graduate student activist, got his ass kicked out of Michigan State several times for it. But he's doing well right now. I think he's teaching in New Mexico right now. But that history excited me. That after the assassination of King and Malcolm, and for the first time in American history, the floodgates were beginning. The barriers. I don't want to say floodgates, but the barriers to Black kids entering white colleges and demanding that our history and our culture be taught. That was absolutely incredible to me. So I'm like, well, I'm in English and I'm having a good time there. The one thing that bothered me with some white professors, not all, but some white professors, no matter how good my work was, they always would ask the same question. And I know that you probably encountered this as well. How does this relate to wider concerns? And what they meant, that was a euphemism for whiter concerns. How does your work relate to white people? And frankly, I just got sick of having to justify that, having to answer that. It wasn't like anyone was holding me back, because I wouldn't answer the question because I thought it was irrelevant. But I just felt like epistemologically, maybe maybe I need to move so I can have the freedom, because I really don't. I care, but at the same time, I don't care about whether or not my ideas are received well by racist white people. I can give a damn, that's not what I sacrificed my time to go to years of graduate school for. That's not my question. I'm concerned about the conditions of Black people and more generally, the functioning of some kind of democratic society itself, So I felt that the question was tacitly racist. So I talked to Dr. Stokes and Dr. Smitherman, and they said, yeah, sure. If you want to be a part of this new class of PhD students, it shouldn't be too hard just to do a transfer from one program to the next. So I was in that first cohort of Black study students from Michigan State. The first graduate was our good friend, retired principal of the Malcolm X Academy, Dr. Jeff Robinson. Love you, Dr. Jeff. If you ever listen to this, call me. So yeah, he had the distinction of being the very first graduate. I was the second person to defend the PhD in that program, and it's just been like just a wonderful journey, since.
Thank you. Some of that information I knew, some of it I did not know, but it definitely makes sense. Like, I didn't know about that you transferred. I didn't know that you were the second graduate and that Dr. Robinson was the first. And luckily, I was blessed to be able to learn from both of you because he taught my cohort some of our classes as well.
Mm-hmm.
So being in Black Studies, but now being like also in English and starting in English and then moving to Black Studies more formally, how do you situate yourself in relationship to disciplines outside of Black Studies?
Yeah, you asked some tough questions, girl. I taught you well, but damn, I know it's going to boomerang back at me. Well, just as much as I do that, when you look at the literature in Black Studies, that there's been so much written about like, what is Black Studies? Is it a discipline? Is it a field? And as I said earlier, I guess the easiest way for me to answer that question for me personally is to kind of like draw on like the transformative paradigm of Black Studies. People like the late, great Manning Marable and Perry Hall and Abdul El-Kalamat that value Black Studies as more of like an interdisciplinary matrix of like traditional academic approaches on the subject matter combined with more radical methodologies invented by Black people for the study of Black people. So my definition of Black Studies, I have to kind of start there in terms of positionality because I need to actually define what Black Studies means to me. And in a nutshell, mm-hmm. That's what it really is. I take the position that like it's obvious, but I think it gets lost in the pressures of publishing and Black Studies constantly trying to justify its own existence. We get so wrapped up in that, which is necessary, to make sure that we have Black Studies departments and Black Studies programs. But basically, the conditions facing Black people are various and complex. So our approaches, our disciplinary approaches, have to be various and complex as well. When you look at every level of society right now, whether it's like social, education, politics, the economy, even like our health, our bodies, our emotional state, all this stuff is being like jacked up because of the ongoing scourge of like structural racism, which is only intensified ever since the election of Donald Trump. And, the attacks on things that I taught to you in in undergraduate, mm-hmm. like critical race theory, bans. I just read yesterday, there's another ban on critical race theory, somewhere, in some school district in the South. It's ridiculous. So, I guess, I don't know. Maybe I'm just kind of straying away from your question a little bit, but I think that we need an elastic, really flexible definition of Black studies. And mine is that, kind of simply put, that Black studies is valuable to the extent that it's useful for giving insight into the Black condition and transforming it in actual, real, tangible, material ways. So, so I guess I kind of start there. So that's, if I had to say my positionality, I mean, that's the foundation for everything that I've done, before and after, I had you as a student in my class. Right now, officially, I'm a assistant professor of the practice of nonfiction writing. At the same time, I also teach courses in the prison notebooks. This fall semester, my classes will be engaging a recent exhibition of Mumia Abu-Jamal to explore the carceral experiences of men and women in this country, people of color. And hopefully we're going to actually engage Mumia and other prisoners and looking at their writing and looking at the ways that they advocate for themselves. Because I don't think that we really value these organic intellectuals like Mumia as we should, So I do that. When I was at Michigan State University, you participated in this. Damn, you and I have been hanging tough, Ashley. The My Brothers and Sisters Keeper program in Detroit, I helped administer that program and led that for 20 years as a graduate student, and then later on as a faculty member at Michigan State. You remember there that the paradigm that we used mostly was Afrocentrism, Yeah. So when you look at the Black studies literature and all these pitched debates about difference between Afrocentrism and assimilationism and integrationism, Black cultural nationalism, I think that we have to value all these different paradigms depending on purpose and utility, So for Black kids in Detroit, when we're trying to increase their knowledge of self and booster their self-esteem as young Black people, growing up, some of them in some pretty tough circumstances, then we draw on Afrocentrism. If I'm teaching in James Madison College, which is you're very humble, Ashley, a very nationally noted school for public policy for undergraduates, then I'm going to be using critical race theory, and other forms of critical social theory like Marxism to give students that analysis, so they don't read Tocqueville and the Federalist Papers without considering the anti-Federalist Papers. I'm not sure if you were in the class when I took those books. I shouldn't be saying this publicly. Well, they can't do anything. They don't pay me anymore. Where I brought in all these canonical texts, including Tocqueville. And I basically jumped in the air and I started kicking them across the room, saying that in order to demonstrate that we need to value the canon, but that's these canonical readings, that they're not all it. And in many ways, they're really destructive if we don't present, their antithesis, challenges to it. Because even while the Federalist Papers only exist because there were pitched debates, but those debates weren't actually being taught, in James Madison College. So anyway, I'm rambling a little bit as I normally do, but that's how I position myself as a Black studies scholar. That I'll draw on anything. It really just depends on what are my goals and objectives as a professor, as a writer, as a teacher, as a social activist, and I'll pick the tool that helps me achieve that result.
So, and this is not a question that I gave you beforehand, so I apologize for this, but I am very interested, particularly right now and in the role that I have, one, being able to be in a Black studies department, but also, really having to think critically about curriculum and courses and training and all of those things. And then, having been in places outside of Black studies, predominantly writing and composition, prior to University of Maryland, what do you think about the positioning of disciplines to Black studies in thinking about like the fact that most of the Black Studies departments are not populated with Black Studies PhDs, right? So we have a lot of disciplinary ingratiation, might not be a word, but ingraining into what are Black Studies departments, both out of necessity, but also out of intentional under-resourcing of places. So yeah, that's something I've been thinking a lot about lately, and I definitely want to hear your thoughts about that too.
No, another great question. Damn, Ashley. Okay. All right. Damn, you ask tough questions. All right. But that's good. That's good. You're forcing me to think. Okay. You're actually asking at least two questions that are connected, but I think they're also kind of separate. Let's deal with the first one first about like, the role that the so-called traditional academic disciplines play within Black studies, especially since, as you rightly point out, that when you look across like the Black studies programs that offer PhDs, very few of them have folks who actually have the terminal degree in Black studies. I guess I used to be really critical of that because I've been on God knows how many hiring committees, even as a graduate student, looking for administrators of Black studies. And I used to have like kind of a hard line that if you don't know anything about this discipline, if you don't know, the key players, you don't know who founded this, if you don't know the people who actually fought, a lot of times, and they won, but a lot of the victories were Pyrrhic victories. Like they won, they opened up space for Black studies, but their careers were also destroyed. Like for example, like Nathan Hare himself, who moved from Howard University to San Francisco State University and was treated, horribly by, the storied Howard University. I know that things have changed in time, but even at my own school, I went to what used to be considered like a, kind of underfunded HBCU in the South of all places. And but we had a professor named Naeem Akbar who wrote a pretty well-known text on the Afrocentric paradigm called Change the Images of Psychological Slavery. He was forced out of his position at Norfolk State because it was Afrocentric, and I taught at a HBCU. But anyway, I guess over time, I'm a little bit sympathetic with the fact that many people don't have the PhD because in Black studies, because it's a relatively new PhD. Mm-hmm. Like, think about it. Like, how long have people been teaching Victorian literature? How long have people been teaching rhetoric? Well, thousands of years, going back to the Greeks, if you want to look at the traditional side of the study of rhetoric. So, of course, there's going to be more people in those traditional disciplines. But what makes me happy, gives me courage about the discipline is that, because of these badass scholars that we have in Black studies, whether they be people like Kimberly Crenshaw, Geneva Smitherman, Henry Louis Gates, no matter what their orientations are, their work opened up that space where we can have more PhD programs and continue to produce students who have the terminal degree. So in other words, it's going to take time because we are a new discipline and we can't compare ourselves to those like white Western disciplines that have been around for like millennia in some cases, like like the discipline that you and I, or the foundational discipline that you and I have, which is like writing and rhetoric, So that said, it's served me well. Why? And it serves you well. Why? Because language is at the center of everything that we do. It doesn't matter. We are well positioned as language scholars, you and I, and other people that study language arts and in all its different forms. Because language, I don't want to go off on a tangent, but, as our boy Noam Chomsky says, language is not just the basis of thought. Language is thought. You can't have a thought outside of language, So we're involved by the study of language. We're not just studying content. We're actually studying and understanding the ways that people reason and think and argue, and as Fanon, so beautifully points out, that to have a language is to have a worldview. So of all people and mind you, I know that our historians like Kyle and Darlene Clark Hine, they'll be like, no, it's all about history, all that other, like whatever, man. But and I'm not being egocentric here, but, I just think that people that study language, like you and I do, and teach language and teach writing and rhetoric, we're not just teaching language skills. We're teaching people how to think, to engage in critical self-reflection about themselves, about the relationship with the world that they live in. There's not too many other disciplines that take that objective really seriously. So language scholars, are well positioned. And I'm not dissing historians. Obviously, we need to know history. You can understand, the present unless you understand the past. But when you look at the explosion of Black studies, not more recently, but the one that I witnessed when I was an undergraduate back in the 90s, they were mostly like Black literature people, Henry Louis Gates, Houston Baker. A lot of that stuff was literary, in nature. And then the emerging field of like critical hip hop studies that came, after that. So in terms of like, I don't know who will listen to this, but in terms of people that are interested in language, I mean, this is what it's all about, in every sense. And every scholar that I've read in different ways touch on that, whether it be Manny Marble, who says quite explicitly, he said that our writing, the Black studies writer has to write, not just to like deliver information, but we need to use like all the best devices of like literary nonfiction in order to tell the stories, because just giving the facts is not it. We have to tell stories, And of course, our critical race theory scholars, Derek Bell and all of his acolytes who talk about, narrative storytelling, we have to wrap narratives around these cases, not look at them in isolation, as our current Supreme Court keeps doing with some of theirs. They're like sophists, they just like throw out all context and say, this means what I think the founders, mean. And we know that from the study of language. So like, you have no goddamn idea what the founding fathers thought about an AR-15. Get out of here. So, I'm sorry to go off on a tangent, but the thing that concerns me about the field of Black studies right now is that I'm seeing a lot of dissertations come out, and I don't serve on anyone's dissertation committee right now, but as an affiliate faculty member at Brown University in Blacks in Africana studies, I worry, Ashley, and maybe it's not founded, but I worry that the activist part of Black studies is getting lost. I'm seeing a lot of dissertations that focus on like the equivalent to me of like, studying like pink unicorns, if Black people are in crisis right now, we're still getting shot down the street by police. Kids are being taught that enslaved Africans were indentured servants. We're just unpaid laborers. Yeah, migrants. Yeah, my youngest two daughters go to school in Florida. They live in St. Augustine, and my youngest baby, wrote on her own, just wrote a play about slavery, and was co-writing it with another student who was from Ghana, and they were trying to just understand it, because it wasn't being taught. They learned some from me, but they wrote their own little slave play, and a teacher intercepted it, and my daughter was kicked out of school for writing a play about slavery. Yeah. I'm in the process of like trying to sue them right now. I've contacted ACLU, NAACP, and the justification was that Ron DeSantis has banned Black studies and talking about slavery is forbidden. So your daughter's suspended for a day, and that's going to be on her record. But so me, Ashley, I'm like, oh yeah. Nah.
They picked the wrong person's daughter to do that too.
I'm on a plane trip right now. We're about to discuss this, but that's a whole other story. But that just illustrates, again, that when we talk about Black studies, we need to stop talking about it. Like, I get disturbed when people talk about Black studies like it's just a discipline. It's just an academic thing that you study. Not when Black kids are being attacked right now. Not when Black people are still the majority people that are in prisons right now, while Mumia is still, even though he's not on death row, he'll never see the light of day of a prison cell, voter disenfranchisement. This is 2024. And Black people are still facing voter disenfranchisement, So while things have gotten better in some ways, they've gotten worse in others. And so for me, it's like, if we're just producing students who are doing PhDs on things they're interested in that has no bearing whatsoever on the material conditions of Black people, then it becomes exploitative. It becomes this thing where they too will enter academia and get great paying jobs. And then they will make their careers, getting paid good money to talk about the Black condition, produce publications, but never be held accountable for doing a goddamn thing about it. And that's the thing that not only bothers me and worries me, I find offensive. Because again, I didn't have to enter this field. I would have been happy with my PhD in English. I chose it. I chose it not for selfish reasons. I'm like the top ranked PhD student in English across the board, from grades and publications and stuff. Why should I give my labor to English? Why don't I give it to this new upcoming field? Like, let Black studies benefit, from, me being one of the early students at Michigan State University. So yeah, anyway, I feel like I'm rambling right now. I hope that addresses at least some of the questions.
No, that was really interesting. And I appreciate that perspective. And it kind of ran into, the question I was going to ask, what interests and excites you most about the past and then the future. But I think that the concern about the present is real. And that's something that needs to be taken very seriously in considering where we're at as a society and, the purpose of the founding of the discipline to address material conditions. That's a really important thing to consider at this point.
Yeah. And, it was hammered home at Michigan State University in that PhD program where we had to, I don't know what the state is right now, if they still do this, but when I was a, PhD student, we had to we had to have an international internship to prove that our work could speak to the African diasporic experience. There was a domestic internship experience where we had to translate our work in some kind of meaningful way, to the Black community and be held accountable for it. I think that should be, if I had a vision for a Black Studies program, they all would include that necessary foundation. Because if not, then what's the point of having the program? What's the point other than just to create more professional Black Studies people who will just, study Black content, teach Black content, and do nothing about it at all. And that undercuts the spirit and disrespects all of the Black Studies scholars over the years who sacrificed their careers to engage in the political project of Black Studies. I just feel like we owe it to them to not do that, and we owe it to our students to make sure that we don't lose that activist focus. We can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. But let me see something what excites me though, okay? Because that part I didn't really address. The thing that excites me about Black Studies is that it's constantly in demand. So, we've seen the articles in like the issues of higher education and the Chronicle. There are always some white person talking about the decline of Black Studies is irrelevant. At the same time, our enrollments are out the chain at many places, okay? White students, Black students, Chicano students, international students, all trying to understand something about the Black experience. That's what I experienced at Michigan State. And it's certainly what I experienced at Brown. Whether I'm teaching in the Africana Studies department itself, or I'm teaching in nonfiction writing in English, which is very white. But since I've been at Brown, since I've been teaching in this program, especially over the last 3 years, the majority of students that now that they're starting to know who I am, they're coming to my class explicitly for Black content. And it's like a refuge for many Black students who say that I just don't have the space to explore these issues outside of your class. So that's what excites me, that it's constantly in demand. And I dare say I can't speak across the board because I've only taught at a handful of universities since I had my PhD. But I think that the university, in its own way, kind of drawing on Derek Bell's concept of interest convergence, they see that this is useful, for their diversity goals and stuff like that. And the department can say, hey, look, we're no longer all white now. We have more diversity now. And, we can easily kind of I don't know, snicker at that. But I think that Black studies professionals have to be strategic, that we have to find ways to appeal to the university to make sure that we know that they see that we're not ghettoized, that we are actually enacting one of the few places that actually put into action all these diversity and equity ideas that they champion so much as liberal arts institutions. We actually do it. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's not just some goal or some committee or something like that. We do it. And I think that there's an increasing awareness of the university that it's in their best interest to support these things, especially during times of racial unrest.
So one of the things that you just mentioned, right, with the interest in Black studies and in the interest in your courses and how students come to your courses to get that content. One, students also come to your courses because you're a phenomenal teacher.
Well, you're kind
I want to know more. And this is just this is a personal question. Everybody else is just listening in at this point. Because I am very part of how I come to Black studies as a discipline and in the academy is very much influenced by how you taught that class I took with you, right? And how can that magic be created? So pedagogically speaking, what do you feel like Black studies does different? What should a Black studies classroom look like? How do you personally create that magic? Because you are a master teacher.
Well, you're very kind. Thank you for saying that. That's very humbling. I still have to work on, we all have to work on our teaching, I think, no matter how long you've been in the game. So thank you for that. There are things that I like about my teaching, things that I want to improve on. But I think that, in my personal opinion, damn, you just kicked my ass with another question. Okay. I got to take a minute to think about it. Damn, Ashley, I taught you too damn good. Be asking all these damn questions.
Yeah, this is all your fault. So,
okay, I'll take that. Okay, this is good. All right. So some listeners might, if anybody bothers to listen to what I have to say, I think that a Black studies class should have some of the characteristics of any meaningful classroom environment, and that I believe that the most important thing of any teacher of any subject is that students have to know that you sincerely care. That to me is foundational. That you're not just as a teacher, someone who's standing there as a information delivery system, because that's the way that American education, treats teaching or looks at values teaching, that we deliver information. Of course we deliver information, but I think that thinking about ourselves as compassionate, caring teachers is paramount, and demonstrating that in the ways that we teach. We teach with care. We teach with love. We have to, because if we're teaching Black studies, it gets rough. You're going to encounter subjects. Mm-hmm. You're going to challenge students. Some of them are going to feel defensive. Some will feel attacked, not because of any fault of thinking of their own, but because many times, this is the first time that they're coming face to face with a challenge to, American hegemony and questioning their own values. And that's true for, I don't care if you're white, Black, or otherwise, some of the most, I don't want to say resistance, but that's the only word that's coming to mind. Some of the most challenging students I've had have been Black students who've objected to the idea of Black English, and we can't attack them. We have to, we have to be firm, but we also have to get them to think about, well, why are you offended by that idea? What's so hard to believe? When you read the scholarship, what is it that's making you feel uncomfortable? And then opening up space to where they can do their own inspiration, be inspired to do their own self-exploration, and self-reflection. And that's the reason why I believe that writing professionals like yourself are, we have an advantage of doing that because we learn how to do that stuff through our own teaching and through the science of pedagogy. And since language is so connected to our identities, inviting students to think about, these terms that they use. Is that your term? Or is it a term that's been imposed on you, that you've just accepted for granted? Let's break this apart. If you believe in limited government, for example, that's one that a lot of my James Madison students say, I'm a libertarian. I believe in limited government, I said, well, what does that mean? Limited government, like tangibly, what does that mean? Limited, like you don't want any like roads being built? Like what is it that what does that mean? Was Doug Schraffnagel in your class, by the way?
I think he was. So,
Doug and I had, by the way, Doug is doing great. He was in a PhD program in rhetoric, again, following this kind of path, at Michigan State. But, anyway, I don't like to put all this business out there, but he's, believe it or not, he's my Kung Fu teacher. I introduced him to Wing Chun Kung Fu, and, he became enamored with it. And now he teaches Wing Chun Kung Fu in Reno, Nevada right now, and has a very successful practice.
Nice.
He also sells CBD, as well. So, yeah, you can do all kinds of things, with when you study writing and rhetoric, you can do goddamn anything. But back to my point, okay, I'm rambling. Repeat the question again. I'm sorry. You asked tough questions.
The magic of the Black study, like what should we be doing in a Black study?
I think that, okay, got it. I think that students are attracted to my classes because, they know fundamentally that I care deeply, not just about the subject matter, but I care deeply about them. So I meet with my students. They're required to meet with me a whole lot during the semester. And when we meet, yeah, you're nodding your head like, yeah. But I mean, it helps me pedagogically because I get to know them, understanding their backgrounds and assumptions. And I take that with me when I every time I walk in the classroom, I learn something more about their stories. So it's not generic, it's not inputs and outcomes. I cater my classes based on, student interests, and at the same time, make sure that my learning objectives, are covered as well. So sincerely caring, but also knowing that now, I have to go back to your class, in James Madison. Students want to see that you're not just talking the talk. They want to see you walk the walk, And so I think that students, they appreciate the fact that I've taught in prisons. They appreciate my radical activism. They appreciate, especially in the more recent backdrop of this ongoing human nightmare in Palestine right now. My students last semester respected the fact that despite the fact that Brown University almost on a daily basis was sending out threats to faculty, don't get involved, stay out of the encampments on the main green. When I saw those threats, immediately, my Black studies sensibilities kicked in. It's like, you know what? The encampments, that's exactly where I'm going right now after lunch. And I'm going to stay there all day. We got threatened. There was cameras, facial recognition, and I was walking around there like, what? Now, mind you, it's stressful because I mentioned, Black studies scholars, who put it on the line. People like Derek Bell, people like Nathan Hare, who stood firm with students, in their protest movements, stood firm with, women, advocating for equal space in the university, and that only to get their careers sabotaged, by a spiteful administration. It was extremely stressful to make that decision, but I didn't hesitate. The calculation is that, I have a responsibility. My mentor, our mutual mentor, Geneva Smitherman, always said that, to whom much is given, much is required. So, I had to put it on the line. And not to be cocky, but if they fired me, it was like, look, I'm well qualified and I can get another job. I'll go teach high school or something like that. I'm not going to sacrifice my principles by cowering, scared. No, I'm going to stand with the students and do what's right. So, how do you create a good Black studies classroom? I think, again, by sincerely caring, showing students that you are deeply invested in them, each one of them as individuals, supporting them when they need you beyond just the limited confines of the classroom, whether they're saying, hey, man, we need more faculty support. The cops are coming, to break up our encampment. Can you come down here? Yeah, I'm down the street right now. The down the street will be right there. They want to see that you have a track record of activism beyond the classroom, that you don't just talk the talk, you walk the walk, you do the things that you say that they should do. Because if you don't, then they have a tendency, they'll look at you like you're craven, like you're just talking, So I think that's extremely valuable. And I also think that to the extent that you can do this in a classroom, that you have to give students the tools they need, not just to navigate like college writing. I mean, that's absolutely critical. But in addition to that, you need to give them modes of thinking, critical perspectives that they can apply to the everyday challenges that they're going to experience. It could be small things like, how am I going to go home during Thanksgiving? And now that I'm in Austin or Ashley's classroom, I'm going to go and sit at a dinner table and listen to all this shit from my family, that's homophobic, that's racist, that's xenophobic. How do I basically defend myself? How do I invite people to see a different perspective that I'm getting right now? It could be something as simple as that. It could be really profound, but also planting the seeds for those that are going to go out and become hedge fund managers. Okay. We can't stop that. We can't say that you shouldn't become a hedge fund manager, but if you do become a hedge fund manager, what are you going to do with all that money? You're in a position of power now. You got you got an Ivy League degree. That's power. You got economic power, social prestige. What are you going to do with that? You know what I'm saying? So I like to think, maybe this is Pollyannic, but I'd like to think that even some of my students who are going to go and do those things that are capitalist, and, I'm avidly anti-capitalist, that there'll be some seed that's still there. And just anecdotally, I haven't studied this at all. I still have a lot of my students who are in those fields. They go on to become medical doctors and things that are not, what we do, but they still come back and tell me, that, hey, that was with me. I was in a board meeting and somebody said this. And I said, no, that's not right. And then I drew on critical race theory, even though I hated learning about that stuff. Can I give you one short anecdote about that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. So, I won't say her name because I don't have permission to say her name. I don't want to get sued or anything like that. But this is a positive experience. She was actually in your class, a South Asian student who I can just tell hated my damn guts. The way that she looked at me when she thought I wasn't looking at her. Ooh, if she could have killed me on the spot, she would have. She hated my guts, but she was only in the class because it fit her schedule. There was no way out. And she was a diligent student. She got through it. My attempts to warm her up and stuff like that during required office hours, never worked, but she got through it. She passed. Years later, and I'm sorry, I can't pin down. I think it was about 2012. Okay. I get an email from her, I'm like, oh shit, this is her, what's up? So I open up the email, and long story short, she said that, you know what? I couldn't stand you, Professor Jackson. I thought you were racist. I thought you hated white. She's not white. She's South Asian, from suburban Detroit. She basically told me that her outlook was very white supremacist at the time, and she didn't even realize it. And she just saw me as a threat. I said, I know that. And she said it was only she went to Wayne State University Law, when she went to Wayne Law School, right? She said it was only in my second year of law school of not just taking classes that explored, the relationship between race and the law, how racism informs the law, how the laws inform and serve as the building block of structural racism. She said that only then did what you taught me kick in, and also with the experience of, because she moved to Detroit, she lived in near Wayne State, and walking around for the first time with Black people and experiencing Black culture as a person of color who's the same complexion as me, but had a white supremacist attitude, that was instilled in her by her parents. who were very racist against Black people, and especially Black people in Detroit. And then her walking around as a South Asian and being accepted within those Black spaces, like getting, Black people in Detroit showing her love, going to a Black church and, people calling her sister and hugging her and stuff like that. It was totally transformative. And she said that it's only through the combination of that experience, which she thought she was going to get from James Madison, that living learning experience that you talked about earlier, Ashley, living in that environment. That's what that living and learning environment was supposed to do. She said she didn't get it until she moved to Detroit, went to law school, took courses that were in critical race theory, that it clicked. And then she invited me to be a keynote speaker, and also publish in the Wayne State Law Journal, about critical race theory and doing a critical race theory analysis of the situation in Detroit with the school takeovers and stuff like that, So just like you inviting me to do this podcast, that was a really beautiful and very I don't know what you want to call it. I don't want to say validating. It made me feel like the struggle is worthwhile, even when I have students that are resistant to a Black studies perspective, that they're not always going to get it in the classroom. And I think that all Black studies professionals need to realize that you're not going to can't be naive. Don't assume that just because, you're hitting all the right buttons, that you're going to radicalize students and transform their consciousness in the course of 16 weeks. I think that, some students will be primed to that. Others won't. For others, it'll take more time. They'll have to take other classes. They'll have to get their ass kicked, outside of the university, when they bring those weird ideas into certain spaces, and then it'll click. So, we got to keep the long game open, so we can respond to our students with compassion. It's not I take the view that it's not our responsibility to tell students what to think, but to give them the tools to think differently, about the world around them. So, all right, let me stop talking because I feel like I'm giving a sermon right now.
No, that was very important. And I appreciate it. I think that is an important reminder that just because a student doesn't get it right now, you're planting a seed, and sometimes it takes a while for that to grow and for fruit to come from that. But that doesn't mean it won't just because you don't see it immediately. Absolutely. And I think that's a super important reminder, particularly right now in the social and political climate that we're in, teaching on the topics that so often are covered, intersecting with and within Black studies.
Absolutely. You got any more real hard questions for me?
I realize I have taken up a lot of your time today, and I want to be respectful of that. So I want to ask, is there anything else you want to add? Is there any final thoughts that you have about Black studies, where we're at, where we're going, the field as a whole?
The last thing I'll say, again, kind of bringing things full circle about Black studies, is that beyond any theory, beyond anything that anybody's written or conference presentation, the reason why I remain optimistic about Black studies is because right now I'm looking at you. That's why. And I'm looking at the work that you're doing. You are the director of undergraduate studies at a major, very respected, prestigious university doing this work. So for me, it's not theoretical. It's not about surveying the literature. It's I'm looking at Ashley Newby. I'm looking at, hopefully when I come there in October, seeing Jessica Newby, do that work. Also Jasmine, okay, is also doing that work. See, But that's a whole other story. Okay. Because when we talk about Black studies, again, I when I kind of resist and I kind of hedge about talking about disciplines and fields, I'm that's critical, but that's not the only story. Raising a family, instilling these values that are taught in Black studies. Yeah, English don't do that. It don't. And I'm not poo-pooing my field. It's just a matter of fact, it doesn't. That Black studies is a way of life. It's a way of looking at the world. It's not just some limited academic discipline that you use for your own purposes, So, but that's a whole other story, about, your other sister, your other twin, she brings Black studies into fruition in probably the most meaningful way to me, which is the family.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, but I'm looking at you and I'm eminently proud of you. And the fact that we have more Black studies professionals produced by, our foundational teacher, Geneva Smitherman, in the work that you're doing, that's the reason why I remain optimistic, because you're doing the work. And so we'll pause here. And also, you don't have to wait till a podcast. You can always call me. My number is the same. You can text me. Love talking with y'all. We actually
absolutely. That's definitely going to be happening.
Another video call. You need to see Lily, all that. So, not just your former professor. I'm I like the feeling of being